I made a brand new Pokemon that could come to Pokemon Unite and it would absolutely break the game. I will explain everything there is to know about this new Pokemon and why it would be the perfect Pokemon for Pokemon Unite. If you have anything to say about this Pokemon, please tell me, as I would love to discuss on this topic of new Pokemon. Also, if you have any recommendations on other Pokemon to cover in a future video, let me know. Before I went into this, I had to set some ground rules on how I would be making this Pokemon. The first one is that a new Pokemon must be unique. There's no point in adding Electivire if he's just going to be a clone of Zeraora. The second rule is less important, but it's still relevant, and that is that the Pokemon needs to be at least somewhat widely recognised and or liked. Sorry Simisear fans, your time will come one day. Using these rules, I tried to think of what we need in Pokemon Unite. I first thought that we don't have many supporter Pokemon whose purpose isn't just to pump your ally full of heals. So I thought we could add another disruptive supporter Pokemon like Wigglytuff. I started by scanning through the Gen 9 Pokédex, as I thought it would be better for the developers to also promote their most recent game, and then I saw it. Farigiraf. My original vision I had when looking at this Pokemon was its ability Armatail. In Scarlet and Violet, Armatail is an ability that blocks priority moves from happening on the enemy's side of the field. However, I immediately recognised that this ability would need a lot of thought before adding it to the game. And after an hour or so of thinking, this is what I came up with. Starting off with Girafarig, the Pokemon that you would start off your games with. For Girafarig's ability, I reworked its early bird ability into something that most competitive players would probably say is the strongest part of Farigiraf's utility. In Pokemon Unite, early bird is Girafarig's ability that when Girafarig or one of Girafarig's allies gets the last hit on a piece of farm, Girafarig's ally will get 15% bonus experience, and this ability would also stack with the EXP share item. This ability allows the Girafarig player to be the ultimate enabler for their lane partner to get them to their level 4 or level 5 evolution before the Altaria cluster will spawn. Before you come at me with all your pitchforks saying this is an awful idea, I have some solutions on how to solve the possible problem of Farigiraf being mandatory on every team. My first solution is ironically Farigiraf. Upon evolving, Farigiraf will lose the ability in favour of Armatail, and with Girafarig evolving at level 4, it cuts off the effect reasonably early so the extra XP does not get too out of hand. Other solutions that game devs could include is reducing the amount of bonus XP or placing the ability on a timer such as it only activating on every other piece of farm, but that would get way too complicated. Now we have that covered, I'll go on to the moves that Girafarig has before evolving. First up is Stomp. This move was designed to be a decent secure move for Girafarig, doing about 20% to an Indeedee's health bar to sort of give you a way to visualise the amount of damage I was thinking. I also thought that since it's a Stomp, it will have the same knock-up effect as Mr. Mime's boosted attack. And speaking of boosted attacks, Farigiraf's boosted will occur every 5 basic attacks, with the boosted being increased range and damage. Nothing too special in order to balance out a bit with the rest of its kit, which is pretty scary to most players. The second move that Girafarig gets is Power Swap. Girafarig will trade off 10% of its own attack and special attack and trade it for a 10% buff to the locked on ally for 5 seconds. Moving on, as I realise how long this video will be, we will now cover Farigiraf itself. Starting off with the central part of its kit that started it all, Armatail. Here is what I came up with. Armatail will act like Umbreon's inner focus, but for allies. If an ally is to be stunned, locked in place, or knocked back, the move the enemy was using will fail and it will be placed on a cooldown. This ability is on a 25-second cooldown, and unlike Umbreon, it does not reset upon respawning. Instead, you will have to wait for the timer to run out. Moves that include this can be a range of Buzzwole's Leech Life all the way up to Slow Beam. A way to get around this, however, would be to focus down Farigiraf itself, as the ability does not apply to it. When coming up with Farigiraf's moves, I was scanning over its moveset, and immediately I saw something that would be criminal not to include. When evolving, Farigiraf swaps out Power Swap for 2 move options, the first of which being Twin Beam, the signature move of Farigiraf. How I decided to implement this was to combine the move with the purpose I had at the beginning of the creation of this Pokemon to make another disruptive and enabling supporting Pokemon. Twin Beam would be a move that when landing on its enemy does some damage and a 10% reduction to their defenses. This move can also be used twice if it lands, however you won't be attacking your enemies all the time. This is because the move can also be used on allies, which grants a 7% attack and special attack increase to the ally. The reason for making this move weaker against allies is for 2 reasons. One is kind of obvious. It's much easier to hit an ally than an enemy. When I say this, I mean you can communicate with your ally to have them receive the buffs. The other is that if one Pokemon is boosted, they have increased damage to all Pokemon that they interact with while they have the boost. But if you fire it at a single enemy, only they will have reduced defenses against the rest of your team. If you still don't understand, here's a situation. You boost your allies Meowscarada. They then unite move into the enemy team and they all get wiped out. All enemies that are hit by Meowscarada take increased damage. But if you target the enemy Glaceon, yes, they have 20% less defenses and will likely just explode if your Meowscarada even looks at them funny, but that's only Glaceon. Their Slowbro is completely fine. Enough about Twin Beam though, we haven't even started to talk about the second move choice. I had to take a step back and think, what does this Pokemon really need? And that's when I realised it. This probably isn't the design philosophy of the developers. I shouldn't be picking moves and putting them into the game. I should instead be thinking about what the Pokemon would want and giving that move a classification from its moveset. That is when I landed on the second move choice upon evolving, Charge Beam. Charge Beam is the counterpart to Twin Beam. Twin Beam increases offensive potential of the team, whereas Charge Beam changes the speed of the battle. When landing a Charge Beam on an enemy, it will reduce the enemy's movement speed by 35%. This move can also be used twice, however each move interacts differently. Say you landed 2 Twin Beams, the effects would stack, but if you land 2 Charge Beams, the duration of the move will stack. 3 seconds per beam for a max of 6 seconds of slow on the enemy. When using this move on an ally, the same thing occurs except of course it raises the speed. I did this because I wanted the player to pick their move depending on the enemy's composition and their own team composition, rather than just having 2 different builds. Does your team need help escaping? Pick Charge Beam. Do they have a really tanky Pokemon like Goodra that your team will struggle with? Pick Twin Beam. There are many different reasons as to why you may choose one over the other, but I won't cover them here in this video as this is longer than usual as it is. If these moves become too strong in testing, a way to combat this would be to make the beams a lot thinner and so harder to hit. If the moves become hard to land, then there's more skill that is required for it to land, which in return makes them a lot more satisfying to hit. Since you've made it this far, I'd like to ask where you think Farigiraf would fit on a tier list. I'd say once you reach the end, you'd see that the lowest that Farigiraf could probably be is in A+. I'd like to also ask that you consider subscribing to this channel. I work hard to get these videos out as much as possible, and my sub count is a great visual indicator as to whether you like these videos. Moving on, once Farigiraf reaches level 7, Stomp will be replaced by 2 other moves that make the enemy Leafeon reconsider simply running it down. The first move is Stored Power. This move acts similar to Ho-Oh's Fire Spin. Farigiraf gets a 15% shield and a bar that acts as a timer below its health bar. When Farigiraf takes damage during this timer, 30% of the damage received will be dealt back to the enemies that attacked it as long as they are still in the radius of the attack. Much like Ho-Oh, it can also be activated early. And the second move is Hyper Voice. Rather than Sylveon's continuous AoE damage, Farigiraf's Hyper Voice is a single wave that pushes back the enemies and does a bit of damage. Along with this, it will share a feature that other push moves have, that when it sends an enemy into a wall, it will briefly stun them. Before I cover the final move, I'd like to quickly run through what each move does in its additional effects once it upgrades. Twin Beam will go from 7% to 8.5%, Charge Beam will go from 35% to 40%, Stored Powers damage is now 40% of the damage taken, and Hyper Voice now has a longer stun when coming in contact with a wall. Now it's time for the final part of Farigiraf's kit, the Unite move. I called it Psychic Domain. No, not that kind of domain. Psychic Domain goes as follows. Farigiraf shouts its cry like all the other Pokemon, and then stomps its 2 front feet in front of it on the ground. And when this happens, all enemies in the radius will be knocked up and receive a small amount of damage. This stomp also activates Psychic Domain, an area of psychic energy that has the following effects. All enemies in the radius have 40% reduced movement speed and 15% attack and special attack reduction. This will also stack with the effects of the other moves, Charge Beam and Twin Beam. This Unite, along with others, has secondary effects to the user. Farigiraf receives 15% defense and special defense, along with a 5% shield. To help you visualize the radius of this move, think of Inteleon's Unite move. When coming up with this, I thought of some powerful combos that could be created when this Unite move comes to reality. First is Delphox. Combining both Unites would lead to an almost unescapable death. Another big combination you could have is Farigiraf and Miraidon. Not being able to evade the meteors could lead to a very fast death. But what do you think? I'd love to hear what you have to say about this potentially overpowered Pokemon. If you'd like to see more of my videos, I make Pokemon Unite tutorials to help you improve. If that would help you, I'd suggest one of these videos that are on screen now.